I am Chantal. I'm one of two full cost accountants in DRD. It's myself and Audrey, and then we have another two full project accountants basically as well. So I will just give you a little bit of an introduction to what full costing entails, as well as what it is in terms of issue policy and how it is applicable and enforced. I'll just put up my camera. If there are any questions, you can just, I won't be able to see them, but you can put them in the chat. If I do not answer them while we are after the presentation, then I'll probably do it afterwards, during or afterwards. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So firstly, full costing is actually, in a nutshell, it is the break even of a project, of a project or an agreement in terms of what is the actual cost of a project, or what it is in terms of the project specific cost that entails. Looking at two different phases. So what I'll be doing is running through various acronyms and just giving you the details of what it all entails. So firstly, we're looking at as the pre-award section in terms of the proposal phase, in terms of the award phase, the project phase, how it entails and how it will flow in terms of the life of a contract and how it all fits together. In addition, how intellectual property is in terms of what it is and how it flows into the full costing, looking at conflict of interest, ethics, research, contract management, and the financial policies. All of it actually flows into each other, and hence the reason it will actually, you'll understand the reason why we do full costing and how it is implemented in terms of project costing. Why forecasting is important? It's to make sure that every project that we do incur or that we implement is feasible and that we do not run any losses. What does the IPR Act say? The IPR Act says that if there is any intellectual property that a project that incurs or developed in terms of a project, the project has to be fully costed. So full costing is basically just ensuring that everything, all the cost that you need to incur the project has to be costed for in terms of line item reporting. There are a few exemptions where the ICRR is not applicable, but that I will touch on later. I'll also take you through the full costing template. It's a nice spreadsheet that actually tells you what you need to consider when you at proposal stage in terms of budgeting requirements, and as well as if there's any other additional information. In terms of acronyms, you will hear a lot about NIPMO, which is the National Intellectual Property Management Office, and ICRR, which is the Indirect Cost Recovery Rate as implemented. As I stated before, we have to comply with the IPR Act in terms of NIPMO, and hence the full costing is implemented. As I indicated before, financial stability is important, and thus the motivation for ICRR is to cover indirect cost associated with activities funded from external sources, thus establishing SU as a financially stable and feasible enterprise. All funders may not allow ICRR or overheads. In other words, they will call it overhead cost. Some of them do cap it at a specific percentage. Most of them will, in terms of who we do have various grants with, we'll know what the percentages are. And in those cases, we either there will be a blanket waiver approval, or we'll have to apply for the ICRR reduction or the waiver. But that I will touch on later. In terms of Section 14A and 14B, this will be applicable to the IPR Act and what it constitutes. 15 4A, any research development undertaken at the institution and funded by a private entity or organization on a full cost basis shall not be deemed to be publicly financed research and development, and the provision of this act shall not apply thereto. In terms of Section 14B, full cost means that the full cost of the undertaking research and development as determined in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standard includes all direct and indirect cost. I'll also take you through what is specifically, what does direct costing and indirect costing mean. The policy for the costing and pricing of research and research-related contracts was approved by the SU Council and implemented within quite a couple of years ago, from 2010 onwards. From then, the ICRR rate has obviously been reviewed, and thus, as when we review it in terms of the NIPMO requirement, we do adjust it accordingly. Most importantly, to which contracts does SU apply ICRR? It's relevant actually to all contracts, specifically tertiary income in terms of research-related contracts, any consultation to external parties. In addition, please note any contracts where it has been agreed with client that client will obtain intellectual property, it cannot be priced less than full cost, and that I've indicated previously. In terms of if the contract is less than full cost, a request for such a deviation has to be done, and it has to be made to the director of the Research Contracts Office, and it will be in consultation with the senior director, which is Cornelia Maralga. And this has to be provided with, any deviations has to be approved in terms of our policy by the GENE. There are two categories that has to be taken in consideration when it comes to full costing. It's a direct cost. The direct cost will be all cost attributed to the project, so it's all project-specific cost. Indirect cost is the overheads as we charge by way of a surcharge, which is your 20% on total cost and 25% on indirect cost. A lot of people don't understand why it's 25% and 20%, but I'll take you through the template and it will actually show you that it is basically the same thing. It's just the way how you calculate it, but it is built into our template specifically. So it's already calculated when you add your line items specifically, but that I'll show you later. In terms of the full cost, the total cost of all resources used to complete the project as determined in accordance with IFRS, and therefore includes direct and indirect cost. Your direct cost, all costs, which is project specific. Indirect cost will be your overhead charges in terms of the 20% and the 25%. Your cost included in a full cost budget, and these are what you have to take into consideration when costing. It will be, and this nicely outlines what is your direct and your indirect, will be your personnel cost, and this has got to do with all your staff cost in terms of the minimum BRL rates, or that is also built into the template. So all you need to do is just select what personnel costs have to be charged, or anybody working on the cost, on the actual budget in terms of yourself, anybody that else that is, if it's a research assistant or anything of the sort, that has to be included. If there's any equipment, running cost, also important. If there is any audit requirements from the funder, that also has to be taken into account, because a lot of times people forget to include any audit cost. In addition to other costs that you need to take into consideration, your travel cost, your conferences, workshops, seminars, also your SMTs, if there is anything that's applicable to it, and anything else that you require in terms of materials, in terms of lab cost, as well as if anything in terms of if you even need a participation inducement fees, those also have to be taken into account. And then that will give you all your direct cost in terms of the SU policy, as well as what your indirect cost is below that. And then you get any, if there's any IP transfer fees in terms of your, in terms of the project, that also has to be stipulated upfront, because there is a calculation that we do in terms of our template, which actually bolts it in. So this actually has to be discussed prior, so that we know how much provision has to be made for it. If after that will be your VAT. If it's a local funded project, obviously VAT will apply. externally will be exempt, and afterwards we add the bursaries. Bursaries is exempt from VAT, hence it will be below at the bottom of the template. Take in consideration what is your indirect cost recovery rates, or what does this all include? It will be any overhead cost in terms of administrative charges, any financial services, your legal services, human resource services, communications, library services, international office, overhead research support service facilities, banking costs, and liability insurance. So it's anything in terms of the running cost, and that it basically covers that. There are a few exemptions, specifically that ICR is not applicable. However, it's not. There is a guideline which I will take you through, because it does mention a few in terms of what it is applicable to and what is not applicable to. The ICRR policy with regard to third stream income was approved, obviously. In terms of currently, it's still at 20%. It has been 20% for the past 4 years or 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, but we have reviewed it, I think last year or the year before, and I do think it's under review this, but probably for the 2023 period as well. All contracts are subject to the 20%. However, if it is that there is a reduction requirement, then that will obviously go through ILSA Griffiths, and it has to be on application. That is obviously if there is any limit by the funder, but that obviously still has to go through ILSA Griffiths as well from financial services. And it's not said that it's a given, it's on application basis. Key takeouts from the ICRR policy is that all contracts are subject to the 20%. Assets with a value of exceeding $1 million will be capped at 1 million. Anything after that will be exempt from the ICRR. Research chairs, that is a component whereby which is capped in terms of the salaries are capped at 10%. This is not automatically calculated within the template. However, we do make the adjustment afterwards for you on review of your grant, or once you've seen as the budget for review. Any consultation work with no academic footprint will be subject to ICRR. The ICRR policy will allow the faculties and department to add additional levies as they see fit. Seconded post will also be subject to ICRR, which is capped at 10% as well. Any conferences should be budgeted at full cost, which includes the ICRR. Any short courses are subject to ICRR and is fixed at levy at 160 per delegate, which has been recommended. However, we can confirm that with Suzette else if it is still standing at this point. Okay, this gives you an overview of what the full cost template entails. Normally, when you get the full cost template, there's round about a few tabs, but mostly what you concentrate on is the cover tab, because that will tell you, it will factor in everything that is required to pull through on the full cost, as well as the contract price. Everything that has to be taken into account in terms of whether these ICRR are applicable or not, whether there's any departmental levy or faculty levy as well, which also has to be taken into consideration, and then also whether the funding is foreign, because that will factor in your VAT component, whether it's VAT applicable or VAT or not applicable. The other thing that you also need to take into consideration is if there's any IP, that also needs to be factored in, and there is a tab for that after the cover page. So you answer those questions if there is any IP that has to be taken into consideration. So looking at the tab specifically, it's a nice extract of an overview of the tab, because it gives you the line items as required. So all you need to do is, in terms of the staffing, you can actually, the minimum rate is what pulls through from the BRL rate. So if you select your whatever post level you're on, then it actually pulls through. My suggestion is that you can change the rate, but however, that you should be changed on the contract price tab if you are deciding to, for example, an associate professor would be 513, but take into consideration that this is 2019, so this doesn't, so this is updated on our actual template now. So if you want to charge 1,200, and that you can adjust on your contract price as opposed to on this, because the full cost, because then we can actually see what the deviation is between the full cost and the contract price. At a later stage, because then we can see what the actual minimum cost of the project is for us at this point. If there's any external personnel that you can put in, and the rate would be, obviously you have to indicate what the rate is. If there's any equipment that you can include as well. At the bottom of this actually shows that there's a capping of 1 million. So anything below that will be exempt from ICR, which is built already in. If there's any running costs that you can include, but you have to take in consideration, we do not know what all you need. So you have to list specifically what is required for your project. In addition to your audit fees, which is here, if the project is required to be audited, that you have to take into account as well. It's very important that you cost for it. In terms of your travel cost, this you can list over here, because that will tell us what you specifically need in terms of if there's any travel costs in terms of conferencing, registration fees, even your S&T allowances as well. Do take note that SARS does have a guideline in terms of your daily allowances, in terms of your S&Ts. If there's any other travel costs that you need to incur as well, you can also just add on here. It's not set in stone, so you can always add line items, but just make sure that the actual cells do pull through the actual calculation, because sometimes it doesn't, and that you need to take into consideration. If there's any other cost that you can add into over here, if you want a profit margin, you can fill that in as well. And that is in a nutshell what your direct cost would entail. At the bottom of it would be your indirect cost over here. And if there's any departmental and faculty levy, very important, that you need to take into consideration, because that has to be also filled out on your declaration letter, and you have to notify us of it. If it's waived, we also need to know. And if there's any, you need to also list the waiver indication, because that we actually put on the approval as well. Over here will be the indirect cost. So this will be actually as calculated. If it is capped, it will also be that whereby you can just, if you put it in the cover page, it will filter through over here. And if there's any IP or transfer fees that you can indicate over here, but normally that is more on the important on your contract price tab. If there's any VAT as typical, that will also pull through, hence the cover page is important. And if there's any bursaries, that you can also list here below. So in a nutshell, that will be what your full cost entails. It's basically just a line item to tell us what your actual project specific cost is, what the cost is going to, the cost of the project is going to be that you're going to be doing. Very important, every year the BRL levies do change, so hence it's important that you actually work on the updated full cost template, which is on our website, or you could ask myself and Audrey, because a lot of the times there are even though the inflation is built in on the template, every year it's updated, so it may necessarily be not always be correct from the prior template if you don't use the updated template. Anything that has got to do with VAT exemption, that will be your foreign income, your bursaries, your donations, any NRF income, that you have to also indicate to us, as I said, on the front cover, because that filters through. Do note that bursaries has to be paid by student fees, and where you actually invoice for it, that you use the proper account number in terms of, because otherwise it won't specifically go to the correct, be processed correct on your cost center. For any more information, we have our DRT website, which actually nicely links all like the full cost template, and that it gives everything that you actually entail in terms of the policies, why it's implemented, what is implemented, and what is needed. If you have any questions, you could always contact myself and Audrey. Both of us are always available. If not her, I am. And we could always just go through it with you, because it's nice actually to actually speak to the person setting up the budgets, because we can actually take in consideration what all you need, and especially if there's any findings from the funder in terms of what they do allow and what they don't allow, because you don't always know that. And we always do research in terms of looking in terms of what they allow and what they don't allow, as it's very important on proposal stage and when you are applying for funding from them. Thank you for your time.